This is the true story. The dancing man who watched us from the shadows. Come on and join us.
Most of us think we want to escape the noise of the city, to find a place that's truly remote, untouched, and silent. But the thing about isolation is that it strips away the safety of numbers. When you're miles away from civilization, the only thing separating you from the darkness is how fast you can run. Here are 3 scary, true horror stories from remote places that will make you appreciate your noisy neighbors. Story 1. Back in high school, my friends and I had a hangout spot that felt like our own little secret kingdom. It was an old baseball field tucked behind an abandoned grade school. We always assumed that one day we'd show up and find bulldozers leveling the place, but they never came. Not while we were kids. Anyway, our town was poor, the kind of place real estate developers forgot about. The field was built right along the edge of the deep woods, far removed from the main roads. It was, essentially, in the middle of nowhere. That isolation was exactly why we loved it. Local kids would sometimes break into the school to tag the walls with graffiti, and the cops would occasionally roll by to chase them off. But they never bothered checking the baseball field. It became a safe haven for our group. A lot of my friends had rough home lives, especially a kid named Tim. His mom was the type to call the police on him for breathing too loud, so the field was the only place he could actually relax. We spent countless summer nights sitting on the rusted-out metal bleachers, smoking cigarettes, and talking about nothing for hours. I loved that place, but there was always one detail about it that unsettled me. There was a single, ancient lamppost positioned right next to the bleachers. By some miracle, it still worked, emitting a dull, dying orange glow. It was the only light source for miles. When we sat under it, we were illuminated in this hazy orange bubble. But everything beyond that, like the field, the school, the dense woods, was swallowed by pitch-black darkness. Sometimes, if I got too high, or just let my mind wander, I'd stare out into those woods. I'd realize that if someone was standing just 10 feet past the light, watching us, we wouldn't see them. We were on display, and the rest of the world was hidden. It was a thought I usually pushed away with a joke, or a distraction. But I always wondered, how many times were we actually watched? One night at the beginning of summer, my friend Johnny and I planned to meet up at the field. I must have left my house earlier than him, because when I pulled into the lot, his car wasn't there yet. Going to the field alone was unspokenly frowned upon in our group. We acted tough, but nobody really liked walking past that creepy abandoned school and through the woods by themselves at night. Still, I kind of enjoyed the adrenaline rush, so I started walking. I got to the bleachers and sat down under the humming orange light. I waited 10 minutes, then 20, then 30. I lit a cigarette to pass the time, but the silence of the woods started to get to me. The thrill of being alone morphed into anxiety. I felt exposed. Eventually, I decided to bail. I texted Johnny a couple of times asking where he was, but he didn't reply. I jogged back to my car, constantly looking over my shoulder, and waited in the parking lot for another 10 minutes. When he still didn't show, I drove home, annoyed that he blew me off. The next morning, I checked my phone. No reply. I was irritated, but I didn't think much of it until later that afternoon when my mom asked if I had seen Johnny. His parents had called her house looking for him. I called around to the rest of our friends. Nobody had seen him since 2 nights prior. A day passed, then another. Panic set in. The whole town mobilized. Search parties combed the woods, the school, the surrounding counties. My friends and I went out searching ourselves, screaming his name until our voices were raw. But we never found him. To this day, his body has never been recovered. At the time, I tried to convince myself he had run away. He was adventurous, always talking about traveling the world and escaping our dead-end town. But deep down, I knew he wouldn't just leave without saying goodbye. He would have left a note, maybe hidden on the bleachers, where only we would look. About a month later, driven by grief and anger, I went back to the field alone. I didn't care about the dark or the woods anymore. I just wanted to feel close to him. I walked the path, my flashlight cutting through the trees. As I broke through the tree line and looked toward the bleachers, I froze. There were people there. For a split second, relief washed over me. I thought it was my friends. But as I got closer, I realized I didn't recognize a single one of them. There were 3 figures sitting on the rusted metal benches, completely motionless. They looked like statues, stiff and unblinking in the orange light. But they weren't the ones that scared me. There was a 4th person, a man. He was standing in front of the others, dancing. He was skipping and twirling in the dirt, moving with this manic, exaggerated energy that made my stomach turn. He looked ... joyful. But it wasn't a normal happiness. It was wrong. I stood in the shadows of the tree line, paralyzed. The dancing man looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. It was like seeing a face from a nightmare that you can't quite remember when you wake up. I knew I had to get out of there. The energy coming off that group was primal and dangerous. I backed away slowly, terrified that a twig would snap. Once I was deep enough in the woods, I turned and sprinted back to my car. I scrambled into the driver's seat, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I peeled out of the lot, my headlights swept across the back corner of the parking area. My heart stopped. Parked in the shadows, almost hidden by overgrown bushes, was a car. I knew the model immediately. It was Johnny's car. But as my lights hit it, the headlights of Johnny's car flicked on. I didn't wait to see who was driving. I threw my car into reverse and floored it out of there, driving like a maniac until I was safe in my driveway. For weeks, I couldn't sleep. I told my friends, and while they agreed it was creepy, they didn't seem to grasp the severity of it. I stopped going to the field entirely. Then, in late July, feeling nostalgic and depressed, I opened my high school yearbook. I was flipping through the pages, looking at pictures of Johnny, when I stopped on a photo of the varsity basketball team. In the background of the photo, pushing a mop bucket, was a janitor. My blood ran cold. It was him, the dancing man. I rushed to the police station. I told them everything: the dancing man, the janitor, the car in the parking lot. They looked at me like I was losing my mind, but they agreed to look into the employee records. A few days later, they called me back. They told me that the man in the photo didn't exist. The school had no record of him. His social security number, the name he used, ... It was all fake. He was a ghost. Near the end of the summer, I mustered up the courage to go back to the field one last time, with a group of friends. I needed closure. But the moment we stepped onto the dirt, I felt sick. The woods felt hostile. I felt eyes on me from every direction. I realized then that the safe haven was gone. It belonged to something else now. I never went back. But the story doesn't end there. One morning in late August, I stopped at a Dunkin' Donuts early in the morning. I was groggy, waiting for my coffee, when the door opened. A man walked in. I froze. It was him, the dancing man, the janitor. He looked exactly the same. He was standing right there, ordering a coffee. I stared at him, unable to look away. He must have felt my gaze, because he turned his head. He looked me dead in the eyes and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a knowing smile. He grabbed his coffee and hurried out the door. I snapped out of my trance and ran after him, bursting into the parking lot just as he jumped into the passenger seat of a car idling at the curb. The car sped away before I could get the license plate. But as it turned onto the main road, I saw the plate on the car they were driving. My knees buckled. For Pack 207. It was Johnny's license plate. It was Johnny's car. They had painted it a different color, so I hadn't recognized it immediately. But that plate was unmistakable. They were driving his car, which meant they had done something to him. I never saw the man or the car again. To this day, Johnny is still missing. And I'm left with the horrifying realization that while we were sitting under that orange light all those summer nights, feeling safe, the dancing man was probably in the woods the whole time, watching us. It was the summer of 2024. Me and my 3 buddies, Jake, Sam, and Marcus, were interning at the Kennedy Space Center. We were total space nerds, burying ourselves in rocket data all week. But we were desperate for a break. We wanted to see the stars properly, away from the light pollution of the coast. We spent days poring over light pollution maps, looking for the darkest spot in Florida. We zeroed in on a remote clearing deep in Tate's Hell State Forest. If you don't know the name, Tate's Hell is a massive, swampy wilderness in the Florida Panhandle. The legend says a farmer named Seb Tate got lost in the swamp in the 1800s and died there, cursing the land. We laughed off the ghost stories. We just wanted a clear view of the Milky Way. We rented an Airbnb cabin near Apalachicola, about 30 miles from the forest edge. On a Friday evening, we loaded up my Tesla Model Y and Marcus's Mustang with blankets, snacks, and a high-powered telescope. The drive was brutal. 7 hours from the Space Center. By the time we dropped our bags at the cabin and headed out to the forest, it was late. The final stretch into Tate's Hell was like driving into a different planet. The paved roads turned into narrow, twisting dirt trails surrounded by dense pines and murky black water. The air was thick with humidity and the sound of cicadas screaming. There was zero cell service. We used walkie-talkies to communicate between the 2 cars. Around 2 a.m., we finally reached the clearing we had scouted on Google Maps. It was perfect. The sky was an explosion of stars, brighter than I had ever seen. We parked the cars, spread out blankets, and set up the telescope. For 15 minutes, it was pure awe. Then, Sam's voice crackled over the walkie-talkie from the Mustang. "Yo, do you guys see that?" "See what?" I asked, looking up from the telescope. "Headlights." My stomach dropped. I turned to look down the long dirt trail we had just driven in on. Far in the distance, a faint glow was creeping through the trees. We were 40 miles from the nearest paved road. It was 2 a.m. in a notorious swamp. Nobody just passes through Tate's hell at that hour. Jake, sitting in the Tesla with me, grabbed the radio. "Flash M, see what they do." I flicked the Tesla's high beams on and off. 3 sharp bursts. The approaching vehicle stopped. It was an old, battered pickup truck, sitting about 100 yards down the trail. It didn't flash back. It didn't honk. Then, the doors opened. 3 shadowy figures stepped out of the truck. They stood in the glare of their own headlights, just staring at us. Then we heard it. Sound of faint, distorted whispering. It was faint at first, drifting on the wind. Voices. Low, garbled, guttural whispers. "This is messed up," Marcus said over the radio, his voice shaking. "Can you hear that?" Sam asked. "Who is that?" I grabbed a high-powered flashlight and swung the beam toward the truck, but the distance was too great. The light just caught shadows. The whispering got louder. It didn't sound like people talking to each other. It sounded ... rhythmic chanting. "We need to leave," Jake said. Now, we agreed to move to a different spot, hoping maybe they were just locals messing with us. We scrambled back into the cars and tore off down a side trail, driving deeper into the forest to lose them. We drove for a mile, found a smaller clearing, and parked again. We killed the lights and waited, hearts pounding. 5 minutes of silence passed. We started to relax. Then Marcus's voice screamed over the walkie. "They're back." I looked in the rearview mirror. Twin beams of light sliced through the darkness behind us. Much closer this time. The truck revved its engine, a loud, angry roar that echoed through the trees. It wasn't just following us. It was hunting us. "Go!" Sam yelled. I slammed on the accelerator. The Tesla shot forward, bouncing violently over roots and potholes. The Mustang roared behind me. The truck chased us. It was right on Marcus's bumper. High beams blinding him. We were racing through a pitch-black swamp at 50 miles per hour on a dirt track. One wrong turn, and we'd be in the water. "They're right on me," Marcus yelled over the radio. "I can't shake them." I pushed the car harder. We hit a fork in the trail. I swerved left, praying it led back to the main road. The Mustang skidded but made the turn. For a second, the truck's headlights disappeared behind the trees. I thought we lost them. Then, they reappeared, cutting through the woods on a parallel trail. They knew the forest. They were trying to cut us off. I floored it, the suspension screaming. Up ahead, I saw the reflection of a road sign. Pavement. We burst out of the forest and onto the highway, tires screeching as we hit the asphalt. I looked in the rearview mirror, expecting to see the truck barrel out behind us. But the tree line was dark. The headlights were gone. They had stopped right at the edge of the woods. We pulled over on the shoulder a few miles down the road, shaking uncontrollably. The silence of the night felt heavy. We drove back to the Airbnb in total silence, locked every door, and pushed a dresser in front of the entrance. We never went back to Tate's hell. We still don't talk about it much. But sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night, I check my rearview mirror, terrified I'll see those headlights again. And I wonder, what would have happened if that truck had cut us off before we reached the road? Wind howling, sound effect *, story 3. In December of 2023, I took a solo trip to Japan. My family owns a traditional ryokan, a Japanese inn, the mountain town of Kagami. It's a beautiful, ancient place built into the side of a hill next to a river. The area has been inhabited for thousands of years and is considered sacred ground. My father used to tell me stories about how, when the hotel was built, construction workers found ancient stone pillars buried in the earth. Legend had it that a shrine stood there in the 9th century. I hadn't been there in 15 years. So I decided to spend a few nights there alone to reconnect with the place. I flew in, rented a car, and drove up through a blinding snowstorm. When I arrived, the hotel was empty. It was the off-season, and since it's a family property, there was no staff. Just me, a massive empty building, and the silence of the snow-covered mountains. It was eerie, but I loved it. The next morning, remembering my father's stories, I decided to go hiking in the forest below the hotel to see if I could find any traces of those ancient ruins. The snow was deep, up to my ankles, and the terrain was rough. I walked for about an hour, completely alone in the white wilderness. I checked my phone to see where I was, but there was zero signal. I realized I had lost my sense of direction. I was in a valley surrounded by steep hills and dense trees. I decided to climb a large hill ahead of me to get a vantage point. As I climbed, I noticed something off to my left. It looked like the remnants of an old path cutting through the brush. I followed it. The path wound its way up the hill, and then just ended. I looked around, confused. Then, I saw it. About 15 feet away, hidden behind overgrown vegetation, was a small, dark cavity in the hillside. I climbed up to it. It was the entrance to a cave. I pulled out my flashlight and shined it inside. The opening was small, but big enough to crawl through. As soon as I leaned in, a smell hit me. It was overpowering. It smelled musky and wild, like a lion's cage at a zoo, but rotting. Against my better judgment, I crawled inside. The cave opened up into a small stone chamber. In the center of the room was a large, rectangular stone block. It looked like an altar. I walked deeper. There were tunnels branching off to the sides, dark and foreboding. At the far end of the chamber was another stone block. This one was hollowed out. I walked up to it and shined my light inside. I froze. Inside the stone block were human bones. They were old, yellowed, and scattered. Resting among the bones was a long, rusted piece of steel and a pile of ancient bronze coins with square holes in the center. I stood there in shock. This wasn't just a cave. It was a tomb, or a sacrificial site. Without thinking, pure instinct, I guess I reached in and picked up one of the coins. It was cold and heavy. Before I could even look at it, a sound echoed from one of the side tunnels. Crash. It sounded like metal hitting stone. The smell intensified instantly. It became suffocating, toxic. I dropped the coin. Panic surged through me. I grabbed the rusted piece of steel from the altar. It looked like the remains of an ancient sword and held it out like a weapon. From the darkness of the tunnel came a new sound. Sound of rhythmic, deep drumming thump. 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 It was a rhythmic, heavy pounding, like a drum or a heartbeat, and it was getting louder. Terror took over. I turned and sprinted for the exit. As I scrambled out of the cave opening, the ground beneath me seemed to vibrate. I tumbled down the snowy slope, crashing through dead branches, losing the rusted sword in the snow. I didn't stop. I ran until my lungs burned. I ran until I burst out onto a road miles away. A passing car eventually picked me up. The driver looked at me like I was a ghost, pale, shaking, covered in snow. He drove me back to the hotel. I didn't stay another night. I packed my bags immediately and drove back to the city of Kanazawa. But here is the part that keeps me up at night. A few months later, in February, the hotel reopened for the season. My father texted me. He said someone had broken into the hotel while it was closed. They had entered through a first-floor window. Nothing was stolen. No electronics. No money. No art. The only damage was to the door of the room I had slept in. It had been smashed open. The wood was splintered and destroyed, as if someone had taken a heavy, blunt metal object like an ancient, rusted sword and battered their way inside. I don't know what I woke up in that cave, but I know it followed me back to the hotel, and I know it was looking for me.
Think you're brave enough to handle what comes next? Prove it. Hit subscribe to Nightmare right now. Let's see how long you last.